As far as costs go, I'd say I anticipated the cost of graduate school applications because I'd done a fair amount of research ahead of time and had people warn me. But I guess I wasn't always prepared with a strategy to actually pay those costs. I knew they were coming and I didn't always know how to handle them.
So I had been told by some of my undergraduate advisors that I would have to expect to pay for my graduate applications, and to a degree, going and visiting campuses. I kind of got away with going to conferences and meeting the faculty there, and that was really helpful. I had some phone interviews as well. So, at least for the master's program, I didn't have to do a whole lot of traveling to try and get into the programs I was interested in. But for PhD, I basically applied to 6 programs after my master's and made an effort to visit 3 of those programs. And it was very expensive. And I unfortunately had to sort of fall back on my student loans for that. So that kind of sucked. But, I was fortunate in that I had that resource that I could use to really strengthen my application by not only paying for the application, but paying for the trips to go and visit the faculty and go to conferences and stuff like that.
Yes, I expected the cost, but they were a bit more expensive than I had initially expected. It's very similar to applying to undergraduate programs. You need to send your transcripts and you need to send a test score. Except for graduate school, it's the GRE test score instead of the SAT or ACT test scores that you need for undergraduate programs. The GRE test is much more expensive than the SAT or ACTs. I think it's over $300, but being a low income student, I was able to apply for a one-time fee waiver, which did not actually waive the fee, but it reduced it to $198, if I recall correctly. So I went into that GRE test knowing that I was only going to be able to afford to take it once and that the score I got was the score that I was stuck with. And I'm pretty sure that that GRE test fee also includes the cost of sending your scores to 4 universities. At least that's what it was when I went. So when you go to the test, you have to have those 4 universities prepared so you can provide those university names and departments for them to send your scores to. So that you should expect. Another fee that was a little bit more than it was during my high school application fee going into undergrad were the transcripts. I have a, let's call it complex, multifaceted academic history for my undergraduate degree. I went from my high school into a university undeclared and stayed there for a year before transferring to a community college. And then from the community college, I transferred to my undergraduate institution at Chico State. So when it came time to apply to graduate school, it said that they required transcripts from all of your previous institutions. So I had high school and the 3 undergrad institutions. So 4 sets of transcripts to send out, and each of those transcripts being somewhere between $5 to $20 a piece. So apart from the GRE scores and the transcripts, there's also the application fee for each program, which for me, it was somewhere between $50 to $100 per program. So I was an independent, very low income at the time of applying to graduate school, and looking at my budgets and my rent and other bills and car bills, I decided I could only afford to apply to 4 schools at that time.
I did anticipate the costs of grad school because this was something that I knew I needed to financially be able to apply to schools and at the same time keep myself above the water in case no schools accepted me. I thankfully was able to have an accountant because my husband's mom is an accountant, and she was able to kind of help me figure out the best way of when I should apply for which schools when, so that I didn't do them all at one time and do a huge glob of money at once. So that helped a lot.
So I feel I need to preface this a little bit by acknowledging that I come from a place of privilege, having grown up in upper middle class white America. So I know I started out with a leg up compared to a lot of other people when it comes to finances. And while I value my financial freedom and independence, I have a safety net that I know a lot of other people don't have. So I just want to put that out there because I know finances can be a tough subject and not everyone is in the same boat with it. But that said, finances did play a role both in my decision to apply to grad school in the first place and in my decision on what school I ended up choosing. I knew that I couldn't continue to pursue a career in archaeology and be financially stable on the East Coast field tech salary I was making, which was $14 an hour in New York State, working for 6 to 9 months of the year and then coasting on unemployment after that. So I loved the work, and I knew that going to grad school might make things worse financially in the short term, but I knew that if I wanted to stay in this field and have a long-term financially stable career, I would have to go to grad school. So that, in the broad sense, finances did play a role in my decision to apply to grad school in general. And as far as my decision on which school to choose, finances were definitely a deciding factor. Funding and assistantships and cost of living in each given city definitely weighed heavily on my decision. It wasn't the only factor I looked at, but it definitely was a big one. I wanted to avoid taking out student loans, and I wanted to avoid having to work a side hustle if at all possible. And I did end up getting an assistantship that covered my tuition and paid me decently, but I did have to do a little bit of side hustling, but it wasn't as bad as it could have been, I guess. I was able to focus on school as much as I needed to.
A little background is that for my bachelor's degree, I worked as many as 4 jobs at one time. Rarely had less than, I don't think I ever had less than 2 jobs at one time. And in some ways that was great. It very much formed who I am and my work ethic. And I don't regret that part of it, but it did impact my ability to network, which in turn then affected, I know it affected my graduate applications. I couldn't go to office hours. I couldn't go to, extra lectures that the departments offered. And, just that chance to have a conversation with a professor to find out about how to do the graduate school process would have been helpful. And having that experience, I knew when I went to my PhD, I didn't want to be in the same position when I was applying for jobs. So having department funding, having funding or a job that was in my field, if I have, I have to work in some way, right? But having something that was working towards developing that CV in my field as opposed to working a retail job or something like that was really important to me. And making sure that I had time to go to those department events and network and develop those relationships was important to me. So the financial aspect actually led me to rejecting a few schools that were on my potential application list, including schools overseas, because I just couldn't afford it. And I really needed to make sure that I could get through the program.